don't expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
Welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm John Dickerson. It's April Fool's, but might feel more like Groundhog Day as President Obama speaks yet again on the topic of health care reform. But with that legislation passed, he is moving on. This week he's announced new fuel efficiency standards, a plan for increased oil exploration, and tomorrow he'll hit the road to talk about the economy. I'm joined by Marc Ambinder and Reid to talk about the president's post-health care plans. And also today we're going to do a roundtable of national security topics with Juan Zarate. But first, the president's agenda. Chip, I want to ask you, what is the president doing today talking about health care? I thought we were moving on to the economy.
Well, a lot of people thought that, but he's also made very clear that with the polls so low on health care reform and him not getting much of a bump out of passing it, he's got to be out there selling this thing. He's got to sell health care reform from now until Election Day and beyond. And so I think you're going to see a fair amount of his time devoted to that. And what he's doing up in the Northeast today is an example.
He'll be in Maine, and is there anything new in the pitch, or is this just one more layer of paint?
It's one more layer. He's going to be talking about small business tax breaks that are in this. Of course, they are emphasizing the things that take effect this year, and tax breaks for small businesses who do now or will very soon help their employees pay for health care reform. It's something that actually takes effect as of the beginning of this year, so they'll get some retroactive help. And that and other things like the pre-existing condition for children that the insurance companies now gave in on are some of the things he's going to be talking about a lot, all the things that take effect this year.
Marc, I want to ask you, the polls have not shown this bump, as Chip mentioned. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's almost as if Democrats expected to wake up like Bob Newhart, next to Suzanne Pleshette, having eaten really, bad Japanese food, and suddenly everything would be okay. But it takes a lot of time to get that out of your system. I mean, the year plus of healthcare process fermented in a way that was inoffensive or was offensive to the voters who tend to vote in midterm elections. And a simple bill signing, even though it gives the president a victory, it gives the Democrats some energy, is not going to change that. In New Hampshire, close to where the president is going to be today, Carol Shea Porter, who is running for re-election in the competitive 1st District, held a town hall meeting in order to try and prevent one side from monopolizing it. She held a lottery to determine who asked questions, but 9 out of the first 11 questions were from people absolutely opposed to health care reform. So it didn't work for her. She's a little frustrated. I think Democrats have a long way to go, primarily within their own base, before they can get to a point where they're finally comfortable with all this.
And there's also, inside this polling that we've seen, is seniors are particularly worried and nervous about it, and we know they are the ones who turn out in these off-year elections. If you're a member of Congress, and we all know they all want to get to jobs quickly, do you just abandon health care and just go to jobs? How do you play this to try and get around this problem?
If you look at the competitive districts, the Democrats in these districts are not really following the White House's script and selling the health care plan. They're doing exactly what you said. They're pivoting to jobs. In fact, what the president did yesterday, his decision to open places offshore for more oil drilling, is much more popular in these districts than healthcare. And I would expect congressional candidates to talk about that. It's about jobs, it's about energy security, it's about the future. So the challenge essentially the president has is he's kind of going to be out there on his own for a while selling this. It may work, it may lift his own numbers. If it lifts his own numbers, it'll help Democrats.
Chip, what's your sense of kind of the next stage for the president here? Yesterday he had this announcement on drilling, but when you talk to folks up on the Hill, they say, we got to get this financial regulatory reform out of the way first. We're not going to have, maybe not even going to have time for an energy bill. What's your sense of the dance steps, for the next few months from the president?
Well, I think it's going to be a gigantic political stew, John. I think it's going to be everything you can imagine being thrown into the pot. I even had to bring out a cheat sheet to keep track of all the things that are going to be thrown into it. Of course, we've got health care. He's going to continue with that. We've got jobs in the economy. Tomorrow, as you mentioned, he's going to be doing a jobs event. We've got financial regulation. We've got campaign finance reform to try to respond to that Supreme Court decision. We've got energy, of course, with the climate change bill, in addition to offshore drilling. We've got nuclear weapons. He's going to Prague, and he's also got a summit on loose nukes here in Washington. He's got foreign policy generally. He's got a big trip in June, and he's dealing with Medvedev and dealing with the Iran issue, dealing, of course, with the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and getting weapons from Iraq, weaponry and troops from Iraq to Afghanistan. He's got immigration. I don't think anybody really believes that's going to pass this year, but he made some promises to the Hispanic caucus that he'd work on it to get them to vote for the health care plan. He's got campaigning for Democrats who are in trouble. And of course, all of that gets put on the back burner at some point if Stevens retires from the Supreme Court, and we have to deal with that. So it really is an incredibly big and diverse agenda ahead.
And he still found time to play basketball with Harry Smith. This morning. That's amazing. You know?
I know. It's a good thing he doesn't have to mow the lawn, because otherwise he's pretty much doing
and he's got to walk the dog. Yeah.
Right. Mark, let me ask you one final question on the drilling, because the politics of this are interesting.
Yeah.
You know, the president was getting a lot of grief from Republicans for not only the health care bill, but also these recess appointments when Congress went out of town. But talk about the politics of his decision on drilling in that context. What's he going for here?
It's a popular issue of the American people, so it's a majoritarian. It's a majoritarian issue, very unpopular with members of his own party. Republicans in the Senate are giving him grudging acknowledgement. Republicans in the House think it's a complete gimmick, and it's probably a little bit of all of that thrown in together. I mean, what it does primarily is when you start to talk about the Senate's climate change bill, it knocks a leg from under the stool of Republicans, whose primary response would be, we got to drill for oil here in order to avoid dependence on foreign oil and before we can change over to renewables. He's kind of kicked that leg away. So it gives him, you could argue, the ability to help Senate Democrats frame the debate. I don't think it gets him too many votes, because I think he already has a couple of votes for not a cap and trade type of system in the Senate, but I think he has some Republican votes for a strong climate bill that doesn't include cap and trade.
Okay, Marc Ambinder, thanks very much. Chip Reid on the lawn of the White House, thanks very much for being with us. Juan Zarate is now here to talk to us as a part of a new feature. He keeps our newsroom updated on the latest national security news at all hours of the day, and now we're going to let you in on what that's like. So Juan, what's going on in the world?
Well, lots going on. You heard a bit of it from Chip there, John. But certainly this week we saw the return of terrorism to the Russian heartland with the attacks on the Russian metro, continued attacks in Dagestan, the Caucasus area of Russia. This has been heating up for the past year or so. And it's been a little bit under the radar screen, but now that you've had these attacks in the metro in Moscow, you see people focusing on this problem again. And you've got a claim of responsibility by Doku Umarov, who's one of the Chechen militant leaders, basically promising further attacks in the heartland. And so this presents a real threat, not only to the Russian people, but to the legacy of President Putin, who had basically staked his claim on 5 years of relative calm since the period of heightened terrorism in 2004.
How does it affect our relationship with the Russians, which is to say, in the past, when Putin has overreached, American presidents have tried to say, don't go too far, and he's responded by saying, we're just responding to our own version of 9/11. How does it change our relationship with them?
Well, it actually provides an opportunity for cooperation, because it's a point of both mutual sympathy and cooperation where you can say, look, we've got similar counterterrorism problems. Obviously, you don't want the Russians to overreach and commit human rights abuses, which they're accused of often in places like Chechnya or Ingushetia. But it's a point at which we can say, look, we can share information, we can look at the problem of Central Asia and Afghanistan as a holistic problem, and we've got to deal with these problems together. And so I think it's a point of opportunity, especially as President Obama and President Medvedev have come to terms on the arms treaty. And so now this is a moment where you can say, look, there's further things that we need to work on together, and Russia and the U.S. are partners. So I think it's an opportunity, actually.
Okay, now let's continue our tour of the globe here. What's next?
Well, I think, again, a bit under the radar screen, but has been noticed by the press, there's a cyber war underway in China. You've got Google going head-to-head, a company, with the Chinese state. Google, as many people know, based on news reports, has rerouted its servers and its online presence to the uncensored sites it has in Hong Kong. That's due to cyber hacking and concerns that they've had for a long time with hacking and also censorship by the Chinese government. This has led to a very fierce reaction from the Chinese, trying to block some of that access to Hong Kong. And then you've also seen this week some additional hacking of those who've been critical of the Chinese, people in Vietnam, Vietnamese users of Google. Journalists have been attacked and hacked. And so there's a low-grade cyber war underway that I think we need to watch very carefully.
Two big and mysterious powers, China and Google. All right, so what's the next?
Well, the next, I think, big issue it appeared in the front page of the New York Times today, and it came out of the court, a federal court in San Francisco yesterday, a ruling that, in essence, held that the surveillance program from the National Security Agency, the NSA surveillance program, which was a warrantless program, at least according to the court, was illegal. And that is a big case because it represents two issues. One, it's a historical ruling of that program, a program that did not rely on the use of warrants to wiretap. Secondly, it was an attempt by the Obama administration to use something called the state secrets privilege to try to block the case from coming to an actual ruling. So in some ways, they were defending the Bush administration by using this privilege. That didn't work. And so now you have a ruling on the books that this program was illegal, at least as presented to the court. And the question now for the Obama administration is, do you appeal that to a rather unsympathetic or likely unsympathetic Ninth Circuit?
Right. So you have this administration defending the Bush administration and using the State Secrets Act, which was a tactic used by the previous administration that some of the president's supporters didn't like at all. Let me ask you finally on the question of Iran. Give us a quick update on that.
Well, interesting this week that you had the French president in town, Sarkozy, talking about needing to get tough on Iran. France has had a tough line on Iran for some time now. They've been in talks with the Iranians for a number of years. That then led President Obama to talk about needing to get a sanctions in place in weeks, not months, to pressure the Iranians. And at the same time, at the end of the week here, you had the Chinese opening a crack here, saying they're willing to discuss the potential for sanctions. And so there's a little bit of momentum here for an impetus for another sanctions protocol to pressure the Iranians.
If the Chinese were on board, would it be real sanctions, or were they going to? I mean, are they really going to go for serious teeth-bearing sanctions on the Iranians?
Well, that's why I said it's a crack, because the Chinese are savvy here. They have commercial interests in Iran. They want to play a bit of the diplomatic outlier here. They want to be a power broker. And so I wouldn't look to the Chinese to see some very strong measures put in place. I would also recall that we've got 3 sanctions in place already on the Iranians of varying degrees of effectiveness. And so the devil's always in the details on these sanctions, and that's part of this diplomatic dance with the Chinese and the Russians.
That's great. Juan Zarate, thank you for that tour of our very quiet world.
Thanks, John.
Thank all of you for watching Washington Unplugged. I'm John Dickerson. Have a great day.
If we don't expand our imagination,
justification for being what you are.